Y'all, they caught him. The man who assassinated a sitting lawmaker and her husband and had a list of dozens more was just captured. But instead of focusing on what happened, the left wants you to believe that this is all Trump's fault, even after the FBI just confirmed there was no manifesto. Let's break it down.
Belter then traveled to Brooklyn Park, Minnesota, and the home of Minnesota State Representative Melissa Hortman. At approximately 3:30 a.m., Belter arrived at Representative Hortman's house in his black SUV with the police license plates. He parked in the driveway and left the emergency lights on his SUV flashing as if he was a police officer. Belter approached Representative Hortman's home, again dressed as a police officer, wearing the tactical vest and body armor, and wearing that hyper-realistic mask. He was armed and carrying a flashlight. Before he entered the home, 2 Brooklyn Park police officers arrived at the scene. They too had been dispatched to check on Representative Hortman after learning of the shooting of Senator Hoffman. When they arrived at the scene, they saw Belter's black SUV parked in the driveway with the emergency lights flashing, and they saw Belter standing in front of the house several feet from the door. When Belter saw the officers get out of the car, he drew his weapon and began firing. He rushed into the house through the front door, firing into it. He repeatedly fired into the house, and when he entered, he murdered Representative Hortman and her husband, Mark. The Brooklyn Park police officers fired at Belter as he rushed into the home, but he escaped into the home and out the back. Officers recovered Belter's 9mm Beretta, along with the body armor and the mask, behind the home along his path of flight when he fled on foot. They later searched Belter's car, where they found 5 more firearms, including assault-style rifles and a large quantity of ammunition. Belter also had in his car notebooks containing a list of more than 45 Minnesota state and federal elected officials, including Representative Hortman. Now, Belter planned his attack carefully. He researched his victims and their families. He used the internet and other tools to find their addresses and names, the names of their family members. He conducted surveillance of their homes and took notes about the location of their homes. He also prepared in other ways. He concealed himself as a police officer, outfitting his black SUV with police lights and a police license plate, wearing a black tactical vest and body armor, carrying a police flashlight and a handgun. And of course he wore that hyper-realistic silicone mask as seen on the surveillance videos. The video of his arrival and shooting of Senator Hoffman is truly chilling. Again, it's no exaggeration to say this is the stuff of nightmares.
Yeah, this was methodical. Dude pretended to be a cop, tactical gear, body armor, a hyper-realistic mask, even had police lights on his SUV. He scouted a house or their house, waited for the officers to show up and fired at them before breaking in and executing both Melissa Hortman and her husband. That's not just a shooting. That's assassination right there, y'all. A question that was posed up under here is, if they shot at him at the door with them still being alive, are we certain that she didn't get killed by the cops? Somebody else posted the conservative alternative. So when the police got there, he got into a shootout with them, broke into Hortman's house, killed her, then still somehow managed to flee the scene. And are we sure the police officers weren't accomplices? Do we have any body cam footage? Great questions. I just know something isn't adding up. And the next part is where things start to get weird. Law enforcement says there's no manifesto
that came from initially.
Can you identify the potential motive here? It has been widely reported that the list, his hit list, contained names of people who are abortion rights supporters. And also, can you please release the names of the 2 other targeted victims who were fortunate to get away?
As I said, with respect to the other 2 potential victims, I think it's up to them whether they want to publicly identify themselves. As I said, it wouldn't surprise me if they do. They're elected officials, but that's their right. Obviously, they may have families and children and privacy interests that they need to sort through. So I'll let them do that. With respect to the potential motive, let me say this. There's been a lot of press coverage and speculation and discussion of a manifesto. I've seen nothing like a Unabomber-style manifesto in his writings. He had many, many notebooks full of plans, lists of names, surveillance, efforts that he took to surveil and locate the home addresses and family members' relationships with these elected officials. But I have not seen anything involving some sort of political screed or manifesto that would clearly identify what motivated him. Obviously, his primary motive was to go out and murder people. Now, they were all elected officials. They were all Democrats. Beyond that, I think it's just way too speculative for anyone who has reviewed these materials to know and to say what was motivating him in terms of ideology or specific issues. There's a lot of...
For abortion rights supporters?
There were some abortion rights supporters, I believe, on the list. But again, there was dozens and dozens and dozens of names on, hundreds of pages of documents that were recovered with his writings on them.
Did he confess and give more details after he was apprehended last night?
I'm not going to comment on that at this time.
Somebody posted up under here, Valentina Gomez, that is, for USA, says it's a cover-up. So here's the part I'm still trying to wrap my head around, y'all. I used to think that a manifesto just meant a list. I'm just being honest. Like a notebook full of targets. That was my understanding. But apparently that's not how they define it. Today I learned a manifesto means a detailed ideological statement, basically. Something that explains why they did it. A villain arc, if you will. And then according to the FBI, they didn't find one. Just names, addresses, some notes, but no motive and nothing that proves political intent. So if there's no manifesto, why are they already pointing fingers? Look at this. So boats are captured by drone and arrested in fetal position, apparently. This isn't exactly a extreme zoom in. I'll zoom in right here so you can see as much as you can. But obviously that manhunt was intense. They found him tucked in a fetal position in the woods. Army crawling like he thought he was still in some sort of movie. But if you look closely, I'm sure it's hard. I noticed there's no resistance. No suicide note, no final stand, which makes it even crazier that the media jumped straight to Trump, because this was the moment their narrative officially flipped. There he is. The guy responsible for one of the most targeted political killings in recent memory. And instead of asking how he pulled this off or what security failed, y'all, they're doing this. Congressman Adam Smith blames Trump directly.
I do want to ask you about what has happened in Minnesota. You have a lawmaker and her husband assassinated. You have another lawmaker, a state senator, who was shot along with his wife. What are your great concerns after seeing what happened and hearing from police that this was likely a politically motivated attack?
My biggest concern is that we as a society are normalizing political violence. And you see this on many points on the political spectrum. The denigration and attacking of elected officials that you disagree with. It becomes incredibly, it's hateful and dehumanizing. And it puts in people's minds the idea that violence is an acceptable way to carry out your political viewpoints. And you see this in much of the dialogue that we have. No one side of the political spectrum has a monopoly on it. It's certainly, you've seen it on the right and the left. But President Trump is the biggest problem here. I mean, he has used hateful, degrading rhetoric from the day he decided to run for president. And then pardoning all of the January 6th attackers at the U.S. Capitol, people who thought that violence was a legitimate way to overturn an election. And Donald Trump gave him a big stamp of approval. You also heard Trump muttering about possibly pardoning the people who attempted to kidnap the governor of Michigan. Look, if Donald Trump and the Republican Party want this kind of thing to stop, they need to change their rhetoric and stop pardoning people who commit acts that are dangerous to this. Representative democracy is dependent upon people running for office and holding those offices. If you think running for office means that you're a legitimate target for violence, that significantly undermines our representative democracy. And I am deeply worried about it. And I hope all of our leaders will begin to change that rhetoric.
These people are delusional. And the way they describe our party, it's almost like they're describing their party themselves, but trying to convince us that is us. Like, are you serious? We just saw the FBI say they don't know what motivated this man, and now the Democrats out here assigning the blame. Even if you are anti-Trump, you got to say, come on, man, you got to admit it. That's just a reach. But don't worry. They're far from done. Like I said, they weren't done yet because the next clip is a senator who took it even further. Now, Senator Jeff Mckenzie claims Trump popped the lid off violence, y'all. Are you kidding me?
There was a state representative, Democratic leader of the state legislature in Minnesota killed over the weekend, a state senator shot. How would you describe the current political atmosphere in this country this morning?
I feel like Trump has really popped the lid off the rhetoric and the sense of hate and violence and promoted this type of an environment. It's profoundly disturbing for all of us. We have seen increased threats across the country. You're probably familiar with the pizza threats. We've seen more of that where pizzas or other food is delivered to people's families that they haven't ordered. Just to say from the right wing, we know who you are, we know where you live. I can tell you all of our families feel a greatly heightened sense. And just let me just say, my heart goes out to the families in Minnesota. How horrific for the whole country, but particularly we're holding the folks in Minnesota in our hearts.
Yeah, no place in this country for political violence of any kind.
Pop the lid off the rhetoric. Let me get this straight. Trump's tone is the reason this man dressed like a cop, hunted down a lawmaker, and gunned her down and her husband in their own house. How convenient. Somebody says, it's not unbelievable. This is who they are. And they don't bother to hide it. And just when you think the timeline couldn't get any messier, here's what the FBI says actually happened, y'all.
Actually, obviously, to enter them in.
Stand by for 1 second. We're going to go to a press conference by the FBI in Minneapolis discussing the idea that they are going to press federal charges against the suspect in the murder and attempted murder of state lawmakers.
On our state and our elected representatives. Political assassinations are rare. They strike at the very core of our democracy. But the details of Belter's crime are even worse. They are truly chilling. It is no exaggeration to say that his crimes are the stuff of nightmares. Belter stalked his victims like prey. He went to their homes, held himself out as a police officer, and shot them in cold blood. Now, there's been a lot of information and misinformation out there about Belter's crimes. We have filed a detailed 20-page complaint and affidavit that sets forth what happened in this case. I'd like to share some of that information with you now. In the early morning hours of June 14th, Belter went to the homes of 4 Minnesota state politicians with the intent to kill them. Belter first traveled to the home of Minnesota State Senator John Hoffman in Champlin, Minnesota. Belter arrived at the senator's home disguised as a police officer. He arrived in a black SUV with emergency lights turned on and with a license plate that read police.
No, don't worry. I know y'all hearing some of what we just heard in the beginning.
Belter wore a black tactical vest and body armor. He carried a flashlight and a Beretta 9mm handgun. He also wore a hyper-realistic silicone mask. Senator Hoffman had a security camera. I've seen the footage from that camera, and it is chilling. Belter knocked on Senator Hoffman's front door and repeatedly shouted, "This is the police, open the door." Senator Hoffman and his wife, Yvette, came to the door.
All right, my fault, y'all. I seem to have made an error. Let's go ahead and get this thing continued in terms of the charges for the suspect. My fault, guys.
Was found in Belter's abandoned SUV. Based on these crimes, we brought a federal complaint charging Belter with an array of federal charges. Counts 1 and 2 charge him with stalking. Count 1 charges him with stalking Representative Melissa Hortman using interstate facilities. And that's Title 18, United States Code 2261. The statutory penalties there are life in prison. Count 2, similarly, is charges him with stalking State Senator John Hoffman using interstate facilities. The maximum penalty of that count is 20 years in prison. Counts 3 and 4 charge Belter with the murder of Melissa and of the Hortmans using a firearm, but in violation of 18 U.S.C. 924J. And these are punishable by a term of life imprisonment or even death. And counts 5 and 6 charge him with shooting the Hortmans and the Hoffmans using a firearm, and both of those counts also carry a maximum sentence of life in prison. Now, before I finish my remarks, I want to say a little bit about law enforcement and the manhunt that we've heard about the last 2 days.
My apologies, guys. Y'all know sometimes I make mistakes. Thought I had that queued up properly, but I didn't. However, I want to recap, but let's read a few comments. He's in there for life and life and life and life and more life. Thanks for those updates. When is the clown Waltz going to face charges? Now we got the real crooks involved. Somebody said, boy, you deviate 1 iota from the left's Marxist plans. Guess what happens? So let's recap. He hit multiple homes, used a mask, impersonated law enforcement. He had an entire list of names, but no letter, no why, just a kill list and some gear to sort of blend in with law enforcement. And somehow we've got elected officials blaming Trump for a motive that the FBI says doesn't even exist yet. Now, if this is really about political violence, then why are they jumping to conclusions before they even know the facts? Ask yourself, is this stopping the violence or is this about controlling the narrative? Y'all be safe. Go check on somebody today. You can quite literally be saving their life. Peace.